Welcome to No Rares Required, episode 32, Orzhov Phyrexians. Orzhov is a bit of a problem in March of the Machine. It has the lowest win rate of any archetype on 17 lands, and this is largely due to the fact that the Phyrexian synergies tend to be slow, while white tends to want to be fast. So I will do my best to lay out the strategy that I think has the highest chance of succeeding. Just know it is going to be an uphill battle. My Tier 1 common is Deadly Derision. Unlike in my previous guide to Golgari, you have less to do with the treasure token, since you won't be splashing without the help of green, no real sacrifice synergies like you might have in Rakdos, and no desire to grab all of the removal that you can find like you might in Dimir, since I think your best strategy is to aim for an aggressive one. It's still the best removal at common, and worth picking up. At Tier 2 we have Cut Short. White doesn't have great removal options, but Orzhov is halfway decent at making your opponent's creatures tapped, so this can be used as removal instead of as a defensive response. It's not highly sought after, usually taken around pick 6 or 7, and can be an upside if you do wind up in Orzhov. Also at Tier 2, I put Alabaster Host Intercessor. The theme is Phyrexians, which this is, and it's also late game removal. The problem is that you want the game to be over before you get to 6 mana. Next up at Tier 2 is Knight of New Coalition. You aren't aiming to have Knight synergies like you would in Azorius, but 2/2/2s with Vigilance for 4 is a great stat block, and the Vigilance does pair nicely with combat tricks like Aerial Boost. I put Final Flourish at Tier 2 as well. With an aggressive strategy, you want cheap removal, and it doesn't get better than Final Flourish. Next up at Tier 2 is Ichor Drinker. My strategy is built around Phyrexian Censor at Uncommon. As we'll cover shortly, it causes non-Phyrexians to enter the battlefield tapped, and limits each player to one non-Phyrexian spell a turn. Most of the Phyrexians are non-Phyrexians until you flip them, which is part of the problem for the strategy, since you need to take advantage of the cards that are Phyrexians on the front side, like Ichor Drinker. My last Tier 2 common is Unseal the Necropolis. This card is best in Dimir, since you can loop it with Halo Charged Scob in blue, but I've still found it to be above average in Orzhov. I aim to have a fair number of cheap creatures, so this will likely result in a double spell, or reclaiming something you can immediately play in this archetype. At Tier 3 we have Bolas Slinger. If I'm aiming already to tap my opponent's creatures with Phyrexian Censor, this can be nice, similar to Boros, where even if it enters tapped, it immediately pressures the opponent by removing a blocker and giving one of my attackers +1/+1. Next up at Tier 3 we have Aerial Boost. Not as good as it is in basically every other white archetype. It still pairs very nicely with Vigilance off of Knights of the New Coalition, as well as makes a nice turn 3 play with Norn's Inquisitor at Uncommon. Similarly, I put Angelic Intervention at Tier 3. It's a nice aggressive combat trick, and is an excellent response to your opponent playing something like Afara's Dispersal, or to your opponent's removal. Alabaster Host Sanctifier is my last common at Tier 3. Once again, it's a Phyrexian on the front side, and that's a good thing. It's also the first card that isn't very highly sought after in other archetypes, and you can look to take advantage of that by picking them up around pick 7 or 8. Now for the uncommons. At least Orzhov gets access to a mythic level uncommon, Norn's Inquisitor. The downside is that Azorius actually does the Phyrexian thing better than Orzhov, but we're trying to make lemons into lemonade in this archetype, and this is at least a decent payoff for being in the Phyrexian archetype of Orzhov. At Tier 1 we have Phyrexian Censor. Like Vatkeeper in Golgari, and Furnace Reigns in Rakdos, Phyrexian Censor is my card that I won't enter the Orzhov archetype without. My whole strategy is centered around this card. The upside? It goes late for an uncommon, around pick 6 or 7. The problem is that there are, on average, you'll only see 1 or 2 of an uncommon, so it's certainly difficult to plan to pick this one up from the get-go. A note on this is if you're watching this guide to refresh on March of the Machine for an arena throwback draft, flipping a battle does count as it can count as a second spell, and it was a very common mistake to forget, and I enjoyed watching my opponents accidentally flip their battle for nothing. At tier 2, we have Blight Reaper Thallid. It flips into Blight Sower Thallid, a 3/3 Phyrexian that gets a +1/+1 from Norn's Inquisitor if you happen to have it in play, and creates 2 1/1 Sapperling tokens, one when it flips and one when it dies. The problem is, it isn't a Phyrexian on the front side, so it does enter tapped if you have Phyrexian Censor in play. The idea behind tapping your opponent's creatures with Censor, and maybe with Bolus Slinger, is at least that you get paid off for going wide, since the name of the game is limiting your opponent's blockers. Now for Tier 3. Phyrexian Awakening fits into the Phyrexian strategy. Surprise, surprise. Giving all of your Phyrexians Vigilance also works nicely with the Combat Trick Aerial Boost. I also put Scornblade Berserker at Tier 3. You want early plays, and being able to put a +1/+1 on a creature and then use this to block and sack to draw fits pretty nicely into the aggressive archetype. Next up at Tier 3 is Gift of Completion. Orzhov is the only archetype that I look to play this card. When you are going wide, it's not uncommon for some casualties to occur as you slam your sea of 1/1s and 2/2s at your opponent, and this at least lets you surveil to find additional threats or removal. My last Tier 3 uncommon is Merciless Repurposing. You want the game to be over before turn 6. In reality, though, it's usually a bit of a dream for the archetype to actually close the game before turn 6, so having some late-game removal like Repurposing and Alabaster Host Intercessor has been helpful to get through your last opponent's defenses. And now for the rares. And if you are in Orzhov, you better have a reason for it. And let's be honest, the reason is usually a rare. Sunfall and Boonbringer Valkyrie are Tier S and come to mind. Maybe you started out with a lot of black removal in Pack 1 and then opened up Sunfall or Boonbringer in Pack 2. Or maybe you opened up a White Bomb in Pack 1 and then followed it up with this guy, Hoarding Broodlord, in Pack 2. Hoarding Broodlord is great in every black archetype, but I think Orzhov is the best since hopefully you have Sunfall or Boonbringer to tutor, and Orzhov has the most go-wide strategy of any of the black archetypes already, so you can easily take advantage of the Convoke. I'm going to skip Breach the Multiverse. Great card, but Dimir is the most likely to stall to 7, and it gets the largest payoff for having mill synergies. I put it at Tier 1 in Golgari. In Orzhov. Pile On, I put it Tier 2, since it has Convoke and can take advantage of going wide. Glissa, Herald of Predation, I also put it Tier 2, but I'm less interested in splashing in this archetype. At Tier 3, we have Grafted Butcher, and I think it deserves a spotlight. If you are making all of your opponent's blockers tapped, then Menace works wonders, even if it's just for a turn. And look, it also gives all your Phyrexians +1/+1. This is the sort of rare that if I opened it up in Pack 1, I might try to make Orzhov work from the get-go, just for funsies. Archpriest of the Shadows, I also put at Tier 3. She's probably best in Dimir, where you can reanimate something extra juicy that you found through self-mill, but my brain goes to Orzhov when I see her, and I'd argue that Orzhov is her best archetype. If you are sending your fleet in aggressively, there are going to be some casualties, and giving something Death Touch that if they decide to let through feels really good to put on a 1/1, even if you might not have the perfect bomb to reanimate. I'm going to skip over a bunch of rares at Tier 3. Invasion of Fiora, the Black Wrath, is best in Golgari, as I covered yesterday. Yorion, Sky Nomad, I prefer in blue archetypes because of Preening Champion. Gyruda, Doom of Depths, I prefer in a less aggressive strategy that is looking for late-game threats. Guardian of Girapur, I prefer in Azorius because of Blinking Preening Champion. And Lurrus, I prefer in Azorius, since it's nice with the lifelink race in the air. Invasion of Tolvada is a rare that I reserve for Orzhov, or sometimes as a white splash in Dimir. It's very slow for what I'm typically aiming to do in Orzhov, but it can flip into the Broken Sky, and the Broken Sky is truly broken. Your incubator tokens get +1/+0 and have lifelink, and at the beginning of your instep you get to create a 2/1 flying spirit token. Once this is flipped, it is hard to lose, so it fits well enough in the aggro strategy as a target to attack instead of your opponent's life total. Just hope that they aren't playing Sunfall or Breach, and everything should be fine. My last tier 3 rare that I only play in Orzhov is Drana and Linvala. Nothing too spectacular, but a 3/4 Vigilance Flyer for 4 is an easy inclusion. Now for the mythics. Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite is an amazing mythic for any white archetype, but I immediately think of Celestia because it's best in a white creature-centric mid-range deck. I put it at tier S in Orzhov. Archangel Elspeth is great as well, but I tend to think of Azorius, where the 1/1 lifelink is great at gumming up the ground as you win in the air. I put her at tier 1. Sheoldred is best in Rakdos, where the Edict has the most payoff, as well as Invasion of Innistrad, since you want the removal in the archetype, and you can pair it with Invasion of Mercadia to win by going wide off of the 2/2s. I put both at tier 1. Sword of Once and Future I also put at tier 1, but prefer Golgari because you can hit Cosmic Hunger or Final Flourish. Elesh Norn number 2 is worth a spotlight. It's a Phyrexian, so it fits the theme, and if you can't get wide enough to beat your opponent, which would be surprising since they take 2 damage for everything they block unless they pay 2 colorless, but plan B, you can use your guys as fodder to flip into the Argent Etchings. Just be careful because if they remove Elesh Norn in response, you just 4/1 to yourself. I did it week 1 of the set and hope to never experience that pain again. If you do manage to flip though, she makes 5 2/2 incubator tokens, activates any that weren't already active, then gives everything +1/+1 and double strike, and for the grand finale destroys all permanents except for artifacts, lands, and Phyrexians before returning to the battlefield as her lovely self. I'm going to skip Kenrith, the Returned King, best in 4-color soup, or Celestia, and Sheoldred, Whispering One, which I prefer in Dimir because of the graveyard self-mill reanimation synergies. Here's one, though, that I think some people might overlook. Skithiryx, the Blight Dragon. Not a great card for a mythic, but it's always fun to see an old card with Regenerate see its time back in the sun. And if I open this up, pack 1, pick 1, my mind does go to Orzhov, because you can pair this with Aerial Boost for a 2-turn clock instead of a 3-turn clock, and get that elusive poison counter victory. Thank you for watching my guide to Orzhov. That covers all of the archetypes for March of the Machine. On Friday, I will do my best to publish my overview video for Lord of the Rings, so it can be ready for people to watch before attending pre-release. Thank you for clicking like and subscribe. I appreciate it. Good luck getting those trophies, and I will see you on Friday.